You're watching BionicDance. Don't run on automatic, instead, please think.
What is atheism? Atheism is the view that God does not exist.
They always do this, telling us what our position is before the debate even starts, and getting it rather badly wrong. Theism is the belief that God exists, but atheism is not its opposite, not the view that God doesn't exist. The prefix a means absence or without, not opposite. Atheism is not having the belief that God exists. He says it quite clearly himself.
Theists, those who believe God exists.
Those that believe God exists. But then he attaches the negation, the don't, to the wrong place, not on those that believe, but rather on God exists. And they never provide another word to express this concept of non-belief. Oh, they try to throw agnostic around to mean that. And even if we ignore that the word's basis, gnosis, means knowledge and thus doesn't address the question of belief, there's still always a wishy-washy, I'm just not certain connotation to agnostic. Never do they give a word to express that one is not declaring there isn't a God, just that one is quite confident in one's non-belief, that one says, I started out without any belief, then you folks told me about this God creature of yours, but provided no evidence for his, her, its, or their existence, so I continue to not believe. And no word is given for those who do not believe because they were never exposed to the topic at all, like babies. In their world, there is no catch-all term for everybody who does not believe in God, regardless of the reason or the degree of non-belief. Except there is a word for that. It's atheist. Atheist, not a theist. Let's do this. Greetings, fellow space travelers, BionicDance here. Today we're not just discussing what atheism is, but whether or not it's reasonable and logical to not believe in God's existence. We're apparently going to have to stumble around a lot of unfounded assumptions, biases, and straw men, but we'll get there in the end.
Recent statistics show an increasing number of people claiming to be atheists, up to 10% of people worldwide. So why are more and more people becoming atheists?
Maybe it's because we've outgrown the need for the emotional crutch that is God, that we've accepted that there are things we don't know, and willing to seek that knowledge instead of making up spiritual teddy bears to make us feel better. The more we learn, the less we need God, even regardless of the fact that, in all of our years of studying the universe, we've never found him.
Why doesn't God simply reveal himself to people, proving that he exists? Surely if God would just appear, the thinking goes, everyone would believe in him.
Well, seeing sure is a stepping stone to believing, you can't deny it.
The problem here is that it is not God's desire to just convince people that he exists. It is God's desire for people to believe in him by faith.
What's the difference really between a God you believe in by faith and a God who isn't actually there? And how do you tell the difference between that belief and gullibility? Are you believing in a God that really wants faith? Or was this faith requirement made up by people who knew they couldn't prove God is real and they needed some way to keep people from calling bullshit and leaving the religion? Forget for a moment which of those possibilities you prefer. Which one is more reasonably true? Which one best matches the world we see around us?
God clearly demonstrated his existence many times in the Old Testament. Did the people believe that God exists? Yes. Did they turn from their evil ways and obey God? No.
And you figure God not showing up will make things better. That's like saying that the cops will never show up to a crime scene, and so people will start committing fewer crimes. Makes perfect sense.
The existence of God must be accepted by faith, but this does not mean belief in God is illogical. There are many good arguments for the existence of God. The Bible teaches that God's existence is clearly seen in the universe.
This was written by people whose scientific understanding of the universe was on par with a modern-day 4-year-old. They lived in a time when people were reading fortunes written in chicken guts and worshipping the sun. I hope you'll excuse me if I'm not about to just take their word for it that their God's influence can be clearly seen in the universe. These people probably think my entire future can be seen in the dregs at the bottom of a cup of tea.
The existence of God cannot be proven. It must be accepted by faith. At the same time, it takes just as much faith to believe in atheism.
The, oh yeah, well you do it too argument doesn't make your own bullshit more acceptable. I hope you realize that.
To make the absolute statement, God does not exist, is to make a claim of knowing absolutely everything there is to know about everything, and of having been everywhere in the universe and having witnessed everything there is to be seen.
And here we go again with this absolute statement nonsense. That does not accurately describe the nature of atheism. And even if it did, there are certainly ways of saying that God does not exist that don't require knowing everything. If there are claims in your scripture that are found to be inconsistent, paradoxical, or just plain outright false, and there are plenty that fall into this category, with whole websites cataloging them, then it's quite reasonable to say, at the very least, that the God described by your dogma cannot, and therefore does not, exist. And there are a lot of gods that have been claimed by humanity throughout history. We do need at least that little bit of information, of inconsistency to reject one, and we'd have to do that for each individual god claimed. But as for belief, we don't need any information to not believe in any of them. Having no information is the fastest way to get to non-belief. And yet, information is the best cure for belief's absence.
Atheists cannot prove that God does not, for example, live in the center of the sun, or beneath the clouds of Jupiter, or in some distant nebula. Since those places are beyond our capacity to observe, it cannot be proven that God does not exist.
That's true. However, you religionoids make the claim that God does exist, and you've never been to the center of the sun or some distant nebula either. So that means that there must be a way of confirming God's existence that lies within the realm of what we can currently access. Well, either that, or when you claim that God exists, you're completely full of shit. Pick one.
It takes just as much faith to be an atheist as it does to be a theist.
Does it? Let's think about this for a second. The theist will tell you that there's a whole bunch of really magical stuff that you don't ever get to actually see, and about which we only know because of a book written thousands of years ago by primitive goat herders, and you have to believe it on faith, or else. And any good atheist hearing this will ask what you're smoking and if they can get a hit. It takes far more faith to believe in this Middle Eastern Lord of the Rings than to hear about it, not see a scrap of it existing in real life, and go, what are you, fucking high? In fact, it's because we have to take your religion on faith that we don't believe it. If you could just prove it instead, we'd be having a very different conversation right now. And you want to say that it takes just as much faith to be an atheist? You started this. Nobody would be going around saying a God doesn't exist if you weren't trying to say one does. It wouldn't even come up. The flaw isn't on our side, just because we don't run on automatic and choose to instead think. Not rating and subscribing has been found to cause obesity, acne, and male pattern baldness in laboratory rats.